We're going to discuss the mitzvah of shofar, a mitzvah which many of us are fond of, and it's a very important one. Of course, Rosh Hashanah is called the Yom Teruah, the day of blowing the sound called a teruah, which is one of the special mitzvot of Rosh Hashanah. So there's a lot of laws. Hopefully, I'll be able to get through everything today. And if you have my notes in front of you, you can follow inside. So first of all, the mitzvah of shofar is a mitzvah of, it's a mitzvah d'oraita. It comes from the Torah. The pasuk says in two places the Torah tells us that Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Teruah. One is in Bamidbar, Parak Chavtes. The first pasuk reads on the Chodesh Hashvi, the 7th month, Biachad LaChodesh, the first day, which is Rosh Hashanah. Mikra Kodesh Yelochem. You make a yontif, you shouldn't do any work. Yom Teruah, it's a day of Teruah, Yelachem, a day of Teruah. And then in Vayikra, it says again, the same day, Yelachem Shabboson, it should be a day of rest. Zichron Teruah, Mikra Kodesh, it's a day where we remember God through a Teruah. Interestingly, it's not so clear from those psukim exactly what a Teruah is. The word teruah, as we see throughout Tanakh, throughout the word, it actually means lehidro e'ar. The reish ayin, shoresh, means to shake something up or to smash something, break things into pieces. So we see that term being used in numerous places. I give some examples in my notes there, the Pnimi Halacha lists a bunch more examples. So the Yom Teruah literally would translate a day of shaking things up or breaking things into pieces, which is an unusual term, but we know that that what it refers to is is several things. First of all, the idea that the sound of the Teruah, the sound is something that should shake us up. It should break our hearts. It should make us think about the significance of the day. And it's a day of Teruah, a day where the noise of the Teruah sound is a noise which is a broken up sound. We'll get more into those details later. As we know, the Teruah refers to the sound that we're familiar with, the 9 very short bursts, like that, which is a sound which reminds us to be broken, to break down our arrogant pride and to make us think. So that's what Rosh Hashanah is about, Yom Teruah. The idea we discussed last time about making God a melech, making him a king, putting a king above us, is taking the arrogance, so is us not being arrogant. We have to make sure we're humble before God. The sound of a tekiah, we're going to get into a little bit more, some details, but the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learns from the word v'ha'avarta, where the because says v'ha'avarta shofar teruah. It learns that in addition to the sound of teruah, you also make the simple sound of the shofar. The simple sound of the shofar is defined as a clear blast. Now the tekiah we find in many places in Tanakh. We find the tekiah is typically associated with more happy, more pure, more pleasant things. Things that are pure, things that are straight, things that are solid, things that are, you find in many references like that, especially when the people are gathered together for war, for example, we'd blow a tekiah with the trumpet. It brings people together. It's a different type, totally different idea, that sound of a tekiah. And the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learns from the wording of the pasuk. The Gemara learns that you have to have a tekiah before and after each teruah. Now, this, of course, leads to probably 8 million different sermons over the centuries, and there's probably 8 million different ways of understanding what the significance and what the symbolism of that is. I just listed in my parentheses some of the most important ones. One of them comparing the tekiah, teruah, tekiah, which is the basis of the sounds, as a symbol of life, of the progression of our lives. We start off straight and solid as a child, solid slate, pure, nothing broken yet. Unfortunately, we go through life and things get messed up, either because of life circumstances or because of our own behavior, or usually a combination of all of the above. And it's our job at the end to straighten it out, is to come back to God and straighten it out. So it's a tekiah through a tekiah. Other people look at it more of the mood. We want to surround the brokenness with solidness. I don't know if solidness is a word, but we all have what we feel bad about, what we've done wrong, the things that we need to fix, and we fix it by remembering how things are supposed to be beforehand, and then trying afterward to make them like they should be afterward. So there's a whole lot of different ways of understanding it. The Rishonim all explain it in different ways. The Achronim explain it in different ways. I just brought some of the more popular and more well-known ones. So however, the day of Rosh Hashanah itself is still referred to in the Torah as a Yom Teruah, not a Yom Tekiah, which reminds us it's a day that's supposed to instill humility, not a day that's supposed to instill arrogant pride. The idea of the Havarta shofar, it's a natural sound. It gives a lot of people refer to the idea that the tekiah is a natural sound of a natural shofar, as opposed to artificial sound from an artificial trumpet. And that's our natural state. It's to be pure, it's to be good, to be solid. This is the fundamental belief and idea that all of us are at the bottom, at the deepest root. We're all solid, we're all good. We just mess things up, unfortunately. Now go on a little bit. Sorry, I went off a little bit on less halachic, more philosophic ideas, but these are just important ideas of the holiday. What is a teruah? The one thing we know is a teruah is a broken sound. Over the years, there's developed over time 3 different customs and ideas as to what a teruah is. One is what we're familiar with calling a teruah, which is the very short, rapid blast, right? The teruah. The other one is what we today call a shivar, the broken, what literally means the broken sound, which is a tekiah that's broken because it's cracked into pieces, typically 3, and we'll talk about the 3 in more detail later. But which we're familiar with, that's the shivarim, and then there's the combination of the 2. And because we're not really sure which is the real original, the custom is for us to do all 3. So even the Gemara learns in Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara learns, you can look there and see exactly how it derives this rule, but that you need to have, you have to do the teruah 3 times, right? And since each teruah has to have a tekiah before and a tekiah after, so the bottom line requirement is a total of 9 kollot, 9 sounds. A tekiah, then a teruah, then a tekiah. Now the middle teruah, we don't know what that is. So therefore, we end up having a requirement of 30 sounds, because is 3 times tekiah, teruah tekiah, 3 times tekiah, shvarim tekiah, and 3 times tekiah, and then a combination of the 2, teruah, shvarim, teruah tekiah. Fine. So that's how we get to the bottom line requirement of 30 kollot. But we're gonna increase that some more. So first we explained why you have to have a teruah, because that's what the Torah says. Then we explained how the Gemara derived from the Torah, how each teruah has to be preceded and succeeded by a tekiah. So we got it from 1 up to 3. And then we explained that the Gemara learns from the Psukim that you're supposed to have 3 times a teruah, which ends up being 9. So we bumped it up to 9. And now we said, because we don't know what a teruah is, we bumped it up from 9 to 30. But now we're going to bump it up a little more. So the 30 kollot were originally designed to be the Chachamim, when they just like very often we find the mitzvah of the day, the Chachamim, the Chazal taught us how to incorporate it within davening. So we do the special mitzvah of the day. We do that with, everything we incorporated into what we do in shul when we're together. So we should all be mekayim the mitzvahs of the day. So the mitzvah of shofar was incorporated naturally into the tefillot, into the davening of the day. And the special davening of the day is the malchiyot, zichronot, and shofar, the 3 sections that we discussed last time when we discussed the special tefillot of Rosh Hashanah, the idea that God is king, the idea that God remembers and knows everything that happens and keeps track. and then the idea of shofrot, which is the idea of Rosh Hashanah, to wake us up to the above two ideas. So the Chachamim therefore were misaking that we divide the 30 into 3. In other words, they said we do one of the kolot with each one of those parts of davening. So those are the prime. That's the prime. And originally it was part of Shachrit. It was part of the Shachrit was when we used to do the Malchut, Kronot, and Shofar. That's the. But it's still yet in the time of the Gemara, there were numerous times where there were oppressive decrees by the Roman Empire against Jews doing the mitzvah of shofar. So the government at the time would watch the Jews in the morning because they knew they would gather in shul in the morning and make sure they didn't blow the shofar. So the people started. They took, instead of doing the primary part of the tefillah, Malchut, Tichonot, and Shofar and Shachrit, they decided to do it in Musaf, which is later in the day when nobody was watching, and then do those 30 kolot with Musaf instead of Shachrit, and that's the custom we still have today. And this is still yet a custom that changed during the time of the Gemara already. So the primary kolot are the ones we do in Shmona Esrei, and we're going to discuss in a minute whether you do it during the silent Shmona Esrei or during the Chazin's repetition. We'll get there. But those are the main ones. So those are called the tekiyot dimu'umad, the ones that require standing. If you think they're being done during Shmona Esrei, it reminds you these are the ones you have to stand for because they're during their Amidah, literally means the time when we're supposed to be standing. So those are the main ones. Now, the Chazal then we're misaking a new minhag, a new custom, which would or a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, depending on how you look at it, a rabbinic or a requirement of an additional set of 30, which should be done prior to the tefillah, prior to Musaf. Now, during the days when they did the kolot during Shachris, right, during the morning prayers, the Baal Zukeh would make a blessing during Shachrit, right, for everyone. Those were the main ones. And then before Musaf, later in the day, they did additional ones. So nowadays it flipped upside down. The additionals, the extras that are the rabbinic addition, end up happening before the main ones, which are the ones during Shmona Esrei. So the Chachamim said, because people can confuse which ones were the main ones and which ones were the additional ones, they said during the additional ones, meaning the ones prior to Shmona Esrei, the ones that we all seem to us to be the main ones nowadays, because it's when everyone comes to shul and listens to the blessings and everything. Those are actually the minor ones, and those you can sit. So those have the name. In order to differentiate, you can sit during those, whereas the ones that are done during Shmona Esrei, you can stand. So you'll hear the terms you may see in halacha tekiyot dimiyushav, the tekiyot that are done when you can sit. Those are actually the first set. So technically speaking, you can sit then. Now, most of us remember in shul, when you go to shul, everyone's standing then anyway, which is fine. In honor of the mitzvah, it's nice to stand, but you don't have to stand for the ones that are before Shmona Esrei because those are not the main ones. The main ones are the ones that happen during Shmona Esrei. I hope this concept makes sense. Any questions on this concept so far? If there aren't, we can keep going. So now we bumped it up to 60. Right? So we have 30 before and 30 during Shmona Esrei. But then during somewhere, we don't know exactly when, but sometime during the time of the Gaonim, this is post-Talmudic period, there arose a custom to do 100 kolot, 100 sounds from the shofar. Now, exactly where the custom came from and the reasons for it, I'm not going to necessarily go into right now, but there's all sorts of remuzim and reasons and hints and so on. And it became, for a while, this was a custom that some people kept. By the time it came to the time of the Arizal and the Kabbalists of Safat, and he emphasized for Kabbalistic reasons, the 100 kolot, it became universal. So even in Sephardic and Ashkenazi communities accepted this custom of the 100 kolot. So 100 kolot now is, so it means you add another 30, and then another 10. Exactly how the 30 and the 10 to take you up from 60 to 100. Exactly how they're dispersed among the davening, there's numerous customs. The primary customs that we have are as follows, the main ones, but there may be others out there that I might not be aware of, you might have seen, or other communities. There may even be some far off community that never even got this custom of 100 kollel, but I'm not sure where that might be. But so then we have to talk a little bit about when. So we discussed the kollel of the shofar that are blown prior to Musaf. We discussed the ones that are during Shmona Esrei of Musaf that are the main 30, and how they ended up in Musaf instead of Shachris. So now there became two different customs as to the ones that are during the Amidah. Some people do it during the silent Amidah, and this custom is on most Sephardic communities, and many Ashkenazic, especially Hasidic communities, do it during the silent Shmona Esrei. Doing the 30 during the silent Shmona Esrei makes it easy to get the next set of 30, because the next set of 30 they'll just do during the repetition of Shmona Esrei. So you got your 90, and then the last 10 they do right before, at the end of davening, during the last Kaddish. So that's how some people do it. Other communities don't do it during the silent Shmona Esrei, and part of the reason why is because it's hard for people to stay together. If one guy davens a long Shmona Esrei, one guy davens a short Shmona Esrei, you know, and the about, so it may not get spaced out properly. So the custom developed in many Ashkenazic communities, especially, to not blow the shofar during the silent Shmona Esrei. So for those communities, such as at Oev Shalom, so then at our shul, so the shofar, the main ones then are the ones that happen during the Chazan's repetition of Shmona Esrei. Those are the primary ones. So you finish when the Chazan's done, you still have 40 left. So after Shmona Esrei is done, the custom is to do the next 30, and then at the end by Kaddish to do the last 10. So those are the two main customs. There may be others out there, but this is where we get the origin. So I kind of try to build it so that we started off with a trua. Then the Gemara explained that you need 3 truas. And the Gemara and the Chazal said that they go on Malchut, Tuchonot, and Shofar. Because we don't know what a trua is, we're up to 9, or 10 actually, right? Kollel. And then because they were misakin to do it before Musaf, we ended up with instead of 30, we ended up with 60. Then we have the minhag of 100, so we end up with 100. So that's the current custom. If someone is not during the Seder of davening, then all you need to do is go back to the default, which is 30. Because if you do 30, then you do all of you're not davening Musaf, so there's no reason to do pre-Musaf ones additional, because you're not davening Musaf. And then you just do 30 and you go see the mitzvah. So those are the various ways we spread out the kollel, and how we get to trua, how we get to shvarim, and how we get to shvarim trua, and so on. I'll now focus a little bit. We're gonna come back to how to blow the different sounds and different laws about the sounds, but let's just go zero in now on the blessings and some other issues with exactly the nature of the mitzvah of shofar. And we're also going to touch on, but just barely touch on, one of the most popular subjects for pilpul. When a yeshiva student wants to go into and show off how he's able to analyze a topic, and how it's like classic Brisker method could be applied to the big question about shofar. And I'm going to touch on it just so that you're aware of it. But to go into the depths, there must have been any yeshiva a student worth his salt has tried to attempt to explain. And you'll see what I mean in a second. It's one of the most fun things to think about. But before we do that, I'm going to tell you what the blessing that the Chachamim said is, because the Torah doesn't make it clear. The Torah says it's a Yom Teruah, right? But Chazal made it very clear that the idea is that you have to hear the sound of a Teruah. Not every single person needs to blow it, right? And that's, it makes sense, right? Throughout history, I mean, someone would blow the shofar in order to wake everyone up and to get everybody, attention. So the main mitzvah is the hearing, not blowing it, right? So therefore the blessing on the shofar is lishmoa kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. So when the Baal Tokea makes a blessing for everyone, he says the blessing lishmoa kol shofar. He's not blowing it for us so that he's not being motzi us. He's not helping us fulfill our obligation to blow by blowing for us. Because on some mitzvot it can be that way, but rather he's producing the sound so that all of us together can hear it, and we all do the mitzvah equally by hearing the sound. And then, of course, there's the bracha of Shehechayanu, which anytime we do a special mitzvah that only happens, once every a long period of time, so we make a bracha Shehechayanu. So, because the mitzvah it's to hear the shofar, right? We did have the rule back when I made a list of rules, and I'm sorry that I kind of neglected that the past 2-3 months, but I'll get back into it, summarizing the halachic rules. But one of those rules is that one can only be motzi others, one can only do a mitzvah and help others fulfill it if he or she is obligated in that mitzvah. So it has a lot of ramifications. But let's say, for example, a person is completely deaf, not just hearing impaired, but cannot hear at all. Such a person is obviously exempt from the mitzvah. He or she cannot hear the shofar. So if they're exempt, then they also cannot blow the shofar. Even if they're skilled enough to make the sound, they can't blow the shofar because they themselves are exempt in the mitzvah. The same thing would apply, and we're going to mention this soon, that women are exempt from the mitzvah because it's a mitzvah saseshes mangrama. It's a time-dependent mitzvah. So therefore, the halacha is a woman cannot blow the shofar for others who are obligated, such as the men in the community. So given that that's the case, it makes sense. Since the mitzvah is hearing it, not blowing it, the deaf. Now, on the flip side, if a person is able to hear but unable to speak, so that doesn't matter. As long as he can produce the sound, then he can be motzi other people. He may not be able to make the blessing. Someone else may have to make the blessing for him, which is fine. So the same thing would happen if, let's say, you're a Baal Tokea, let's say you blow shofar, and in the afternoon you go to people's houses, or the shul has an extra blowing afterwards for people that didn't make it to the first one. So that person has already fulfilled his obligation in the morning when he blew the shofar in the morning. So many poskim would say that since he's already fulfilled, it's better to have someone else make the blessings and then he just blow it. Others say that it doesn't matter, even though he's already fulfilled it, but since he as a person who's obligated in the mitzvah, even if he himself isn't obligated at this moment because he's already did it, he's still able to make the blessing. But the best thing to do, though, would be to have someone else who's there make the blessing for everyone. This would be especially important in some cases if he's blowing for women only, that one of the women, it would be most correct for one of the women to make the blessing for all of the women there, rather than the Baal Tokea make the blessing for the women that are there. But in the end, if the Baal Tokea does make the blessings, it's okay. I'm just trying to say what would be the way to fulfill the most opinions. Because the idea is to hear the sound of the shofar. It's not just to hear the sound, but you have to actually hear the sound of the shofar. If you hear an echo, or the Gemara gives an example, if you blow into a pit, if you imagine blowing into a cave, so you may hear the sound of the shofar, but you also hear the echoes bouncing back from the cave. So because you're mixing together the sound, a kosher sound, which is the shofar, and the non-kosher sound, hearing an echo is not fulfilling the mitzvah. So you're not yosei the mitzvah. You'd have to do it again because you're not hearing the sound of the shofar. It has to be the sound of the shofar. So, and there's another, when I'm going to get to that idea that I told you about, that's one of the most popular things to write a pilpul about. And that comes from the following idea. We know that a person who's mitzasik means you're busy doing something else and you happen to do something. So, for example, I'll use our shofar for an example. You're busy playing around with the shofar, I don't know, just playing around with your friends, seeing if you can make a sound. And poof, You happen to make a tekiah through a tekiah, right? It wasn't your intent to do the mitzvah. It wasn't your intent to be motzi anyone in the mitzvah. It wasn't necessarily even your intent to do a tekiah through a tekiah. It just, that's what came out. Well, then you're not yotzi the mitzvah, because that sound wasn't made with the intent of doing the mitzvah of shofar. The problem with that is that how does, if the mitzvah is to hear the sound and not to blow, then who cares what the guy who blew it had in mind? As long as what you heard was the sound of a shofar and it was the appropriate sound, you should be yotze. I'm just going to say right now that I'm not going to answer that question. It's similar. This question it's specifically discussed with the Rambam, for example, who paskins clearly that if, let's say, you take a shofar that's stolen, and you're not allowed to steal, obviously, and then you're not allowed to use the shofar that you stole. But if you do and you hear the sound, so the Rambam says you're yotze the mitzvah, because the sound is the mitzvah, not the shofar. And you didn't steal the sound. The sound is just sound waves going through the air. Well, if that's true, then why does it matter that the person blowing the shofar should have kavanah, should have to, or why does it matter that he or she should even be a person who's obligated in the mitzvah? So these are questions that there's tons and tons of literature written about it. I want to bring up the question because it's just it's one of those things. You're very welcome to do a lot of research into it. It could be a lot of fun and interesting to understand the differences between the different things. But there must have been thousands of bar mitzvah boys that had their bar mitzvah somewhere around Rosh Hashanah time that wrote their speech about this question. Another question is what if you don't really have intent to blow shofar? So obviously, we did say that the person blowing has to have the intent to be motzi everyone. But let's say he doesn't have that in mind. Let's say he just he makes the bracha for everyone and he blows the shofar, but he doesn't sit and think to himself, I am being motzi everyone, right? So the basic halacha is that if you were to ask the guy, why did you just blow that horn, right? And his answer would be, well, I'm in shul and I'm blowing for everybody to do shofar because it's Rosh Hashanah. Well, b'diavad, that's considered enough. That's considered kavana to be motzi everyone, and everyone is yotze. So it's a big difference if a guy would say, I was just blowing because it looked cool to blow, and that wouldn't work. But if there is a such a thing as kavana by I don't know what I'm trying to think of an English term, but your clear intent was to do something, even if you didn't actually you didn't actually intentionally go ahead and think to yourself, you're supposed to do that. A similar idea would be if you stand up in front of a bunch of people for Kiddush and you say Kiddush, but you're doing it just habit, by rote. You're doing this every week for so many years, you just get up there and say it. Well, it's still considered kavana and everyone is yotze Kiddush, even though you didn't actually think I'm being motzi everyone in the midst of Kiddush. And that's because if people were to ask you, this is an important principle. When I do that sheet again and update it, I have to put this principle in there. To determine someone's kavana, the way you would determine it is by thinking, what would this person answer you if you asked him, why in the world did you just do that thing? And if the answer is, well, obviously it's Friday night, so I made Kiddush for everybody. Well, then that's good enough, right? It's not what you're supposed to do in the first place, but it's considered good enough afterwards that you don't have to do the mitzvah again.
So right. Excuse me for interrupting.
Yes,
exactly that point we had for several years a person who blew shofar, even though he was an atheist, but he grew up in a home where it was done for the right reason. So he knew how to do it, but after certain things happened in his life, he became an atheist, but he continued to blow shofar, and so that's why we were yotze, based on what you just said.
That's an interesting question. That's a very interesting example. Thank you. Yeah, I guess if you asked them, why in the world are you blowing shofar? The answer would be, well, it's Rosh Hashanah and I'm blowing shofar for everyone. So, it's not l'chatchila, it's not what you should do, but obviously it shouldn't be an atheist. But but yeah, it's a very good example. Thanks. All right, so that is the laws in terms of the sound. Remember, I touched on the issue of misasek. I touched on the issue of whether the mitzvah is the sound or the shofar itself, or the blowing itself. Those are very interesting subjects, and these are things that I welcome anyone to delve into those topics. And the topic of the Rambam and the stolen shofar, these are favorite subjects for Pilpulim for hundreds of years. So now let's go into and how this differentiates from other mitzvot like Megillah, right? Where we say where it's mikra, it's reading the Megillah, that's the mitzvah, as opposed, but there's also a mitzvah of hearing. Is it the same thing as shofar? Is it different? There's a lot of literature on that topic. Anyway, let's move on. So we know the Torah says it's sorry, go ahead.
Just one thing before you leave
Yes.
this subject. I think that if you can't hear, you truly can't hear, you can feel the vibration. Would that count? I mean, I think people that can't hear can put their hands near where the shofar is being blown, and they can hear they feel all the distinct.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad you brought that up because I skipped something by accident, and that was the sub. And what you just brought up leads to another big question: what about a hearing aid? So I'm saying this because if someone absolutely cannot hear, now I'm not exactly sure what that means, but let's just assume that for a moment, then they're not chayav and they're not obligated in the midst of shofar. But if they can hear, even if their hearing is very, very impaired, then they are obligated and they need to make every effort to hear it, even if it means standing right next to the guy and listening to someone do it really loud, but it has to be done. So most can say, well, what if a person can hear, but only with the aid of something like a hearing aid? So most poskim will say that he should take the hearing aid off or turn it off or whatever, so that when he hears it, what he's hearing is the actual shofar and not the sound coming from the hearing aid. Now, what it is with, I don't know exactly how to answer your question about vibrations, because there's some line between it being hearing and it being feeling, and I'm not exactly sure what that line is. So exactly what someone who absolutely cannot hear, exactly what that means, I'm not 100% sure. Like, because feeling vibrations, that I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question.
It's how deaf people who are deaf hear, experience music, for example. So right. I think you might get an argument over at Gallaudet College about this. Yeah, an interesting discussion.
Yeah, you know what? Someone can pick that up, and we can reinstitute the custom. Having so if someone can text me or something later, they can research that question. Is vibration considered hearing? If it is, how do you draw the line? This is a very interesting question. If someone wants to look that up and present it next time, then let me know, and let's do that, because it's a really good question. I mean, I could say the rules, but then how do you apply the rules? And that could be very,
Well, could the rule come from the people actually who are affected? So if, let's say you had an Orthodox community at Gallaudet College, and for the sake of argument, let's say the men at Gallaudet, who are Orthodox at Gallaudet College, want to fulfill their obligations of hearing the shofar being blown, and they'll argue maybe that this is how I experienced Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Right. It's a good argument, and I would be very interested to hear that argument made, and I like it.
They wouldn't be listening to that music. This is how we experience
whatever they're listening to. Yeah. No, it's a good argument. I mean, what I'm saying is kind of the traditional halacha, but there's definitely room to go in that direction, and I'm all for it. I'm interested to hear.
I don't think the deaf community would want to be left out of the halacha unless they choose to be left out of it. I think there's discussion there. It's an interesting.
That's a very interesting question. If someone wants to take it, then let me know. And let's and have that. We can go into more detail last time. There may be poskim that went into this, in the modern era that went into this in more detail, and there may be other conclusions that could be very interesting. I'm going to go a little bit into any other comments about this before I go to the next one. No comments, observations. All right, so first of all, the mitzvah is the daytime. So basically, just like any mitzvah with Hanei Tzachama, meaning from sunrise to Shkia, sunset. And then the general rule is that the time period between Shkia and Seis HaKochavim and the stars coming out, that's the period of Bein HaShmashot, the time in between where it's doubtful. So in the event that unfortunately you went the entire Rosh Hashanah and could not and did not, for whatever reason, hear the shofar, you should still blow it during the Bein HaShmashot period, but not make a blessing. I wasn't even thinking, this just brought to mind a story that I just have to say. My grandfather was in Warsaw. He was 18 or 19 years old on the day the Germans bombed Warsaw. And he and his father and his two brothers picked up and ran. And they left the rest of the family there. And in a tragic letter they wrote at the time to another one of their brothers who was already in Palestine, they wrote, we ran and we left all, they named, their wives, children, etc., and said, we left them because we know that the Nazis were going to harm us, but that no one would ever touch the women and children, and as soon as we get to a safe place, we'll get them. But unfortunately, you can imagine what happened to the rest of the family that remained. But so it was Erev Rosh Hashanah that the Nazis started bombing Warsaw. And my grandfather remembers running. They're literally running, the three of them, and they were running through the Polish forest or from the advancing German forces. They managed to escape to Lithuania eventually, and then escape across Russia to Japan, and then eventually the United States. But they didn't have a chauffeur. And they remember they were running the entire day Rosh Hashanah, not hearing the chauffeur until it was almost Shkia. And in the middle of the forest, they passed by the home of a peasant who was blowing shofar in his house. And they stood by the guy's window, heard the shofar, and kept on running. My grandfather used to tell me this story every Rosh Hashanah night. I remember walking back with him from shul, and he used to tell us this story. And he was convinced that this was Eliyahu Hanavi blowing shofar for them on that Rosh Hashanah. And when I remember here, when we're learning this law, so to do it all day, even Bein HaShmashos, but without a bracha if you have to. The women, like I mentioned, are exempt. The issue is that if the mitzvah is hearing it, the same question we had about a deaf person blowing it, we would have on a woman. Why wouldn't a woman be able to blow? If it's the issue of the sound, but I'm not going to go into all the pilpul, but the basic halacha is that the truth is that a woman can't blow for men. And when by Sephardic Jews, the halacha if someone is blowing for women only, the Sephardic custom is to not make a blessing because they're not really commanded. Whereas by the Ashkenazim and in many other places, we do make a blessing, even if it's only women, because so then, and that's because it's still a mitzvah for them. So it might not be a commanded mitzvah, but it's still a mitzvah. So you make the blessing. And this would go for other things like sukkah and other things that women are also not mechuyev in. But they not only do they make a mitzvah themselves, but a man would make a bracha for them. But like I said before, the best way would be is if one of the women would make a blessing for all of the women assembled, and then the Baal Tokea blow it for them. Or in that case, if it's only women assembled, a woman could certainly blow it for the women. It wouldn't be an issue. And then the post can talk about what a child, once a child is old enough to know what a shofar is and know what the purpose of blowing shofar is, then he or she should for chinuch purposes listen. Now there is a halacha that once you blow shofar on Yontif and you're not blowing it for someone else who hasn't heard it yet, there's no mitzvah purpose in blowing it, then you're not supposed to blow it anymore, just like you're not supposed to use any instrument. However, the Gemara says, kids, you can let them blow because we want the shofar to be beloved to them. We want them to blow shofar. So if kids want to play around and blow shofar all day, let them do it. You can even encourage it. I kind of used to joke. I remember I used to hear people joking. If you remember, we mentioned the custom of not sleeping on Rosh Hashanah. Well, this is one way of accomplishing that. If you throw your kids a shofar to play around with it, I promise you won't get much sleep that afternoon. That would be one way of accomplishing both minhagim at once. Then there's a couple other. I'm sorry.
Quick question,
Sure.
Shaul. So you mentioned if you've already heard the shofar. I'm sorry, maybe I get this wrong. If you've already heard the shofar, then you don't need to hear it again, obviously. But if you've blown the shofar for somebody else, can you blow the shofar for another person? Right, even though you've obviously already heard it, and since the mitzvah is to hear it, not to blow it.
Right. Well, wait. I'm sorry. So what's the question?
So the question is the question is Ruvain blows the shofar for the entire shul, okay? Right. And later on, he hears that someone is within the Eruv, is at home, and he goes to their house and then blows the shofar for that infirmed person in their house, so that they should be yotzei hearing shofar, right? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, as long as someone that you're blowing for, whether it's yourself or someone else there, is doing it for the mitzvah purpose, then it's fine. Because that's not muktzah. Then you're blowing it just for the purpose of a mitzvah. Even if you're blowing it for women that aren't obligated, it's still being done for the purpose of a mitzvah, so you can do it, still do it. So as long as there's a mitzvah purpose to it, then it's part of the celebration of the yontif. It's not muktzah. But once there's no mitzvah purpose at all, if you're just trying to, everyone did the mitzvah and you're sitting around the meal and the guy wants to show off how great he is at blowing the shofar, then you wouldn't be allowed to do it. No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So so some of these things I'm going to list now are customs, such as the idea that we blow it out of the right side of the mouth. There's various, just like we bow to the right side before when we bow in the presence of God. So we also blow from the right side of the mouth. Also, the right side represents God's attributes of mercy as opposed to his attribute of din, which is represented by the left side. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but remember, that's a custom. If the Baal Tzedakah happens to have blown it out of the middle of the left side, you're still yotzei the mitzvah. The general idea of the mitzvah is also to blow from the smaller side and the sound coming out of the wider side, which in most cases makes sense because it'd be kind of difficult to blow from the wide side. But let's say you had a very skinny shofar, and theoretically you could blow through the wide side and the sound can come out of the small side if you can figure out how to do that. But it's not the way it's supposed to be, because things rise and spread as they go towards God. So there used to be, and there still is, to have the custom of having the Baal Tzedakah and the Baal Tefillah be separate people, mostly so that things don't get confused. But nowadays you have a machzor in front of you, and it's rare to get confused anymore. So that custom is kind of fell by the wayside. So if you happen to be in a small community, people don't really know much. So and you have one person who knows how to lead the davening, and he also knows how to blow shofar. It's okay for him to kind of do it all. The general minhag is to have one person do all of the shofar blowing. There may be some communities that have different customs, that's different, where someone else jumps in the middle and does different parts, which is fine if that's the custom. But the most accepted custom is to have one person do it. The custom also developed to have a Baal Makri, which is typically the rabbi, but it doesn't have to be. It could be someone else whose job it is to the origin of the custom comes from the idea that not so that he shouldn't get confused, because it's easy to get messed up as to which thing to blow when. But now that Baal Makri has also taken on in many communities the role of making sure it's done correctly, timing correctly, the right numbers of sounds and so on. And kind of so it evolved into the position where it's usually done by either the rabbi or someone else who's knowledgeable in the rules. Yes, go ahead.
Joel?
Yeah.
Why is it the shofar blown on Kol Nidre on Erev Yom Kippur?
Erev Yom Kippur. I don't know. It would be. I wonder. There may even be. Who knows? Maybe there's a place that has that custom. I've never seen it before, but
Okay.
it's not the mitzvah of the day, really. It's and we're gonna get to where the custom comes blowing it at the end of Yom Kippur, but but the beginning, it's not the mitzvah of the day, but there may be places that have such a custom. I don't know. Actually, once it's Yontif already, you really can't. But if there's no mitzvah to do it. Now, okay, and yeah.
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay. You have to hear the entire sound. So if the tekiah has to be a certain length, and I'm going to get to the length in a minute, but if you don't hear the whole thing, then you didn't hear a whole tekiah. So it's important for everyone to be silent, because if lots of people are talking about the latest news, then you may not hear the whole sound. So it's important that the congregation is quiet. There's also the idea, I didn't put this in my notes, but after a blessing, and we learned together many times that you can't have a separation between the blessing and the mitzvah. And if you're going to make the blessing on the shofar and then you're going to talk about the football scores, that's clearly an interruption. But by shofar, it's a particular idea that you may not hear all the sounds. Now, there is another custom, which is not a requirement, as the custom of the tekiah gedola. So here we have a little difference, since it's a custom, and as in many cases, the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic customs differ a little bit. And in most Ashkenazic communities, the custom is that the final blow of each set, you take the tekiah, which is the last one, and you extend it, you make it a long one. And there's a lot of idea that, remember we talked about the idea of the tekiah being the sound of purity, the sound of what we aspire to fix the brokenness. So by ending the shofar, the mitzvah of shofar, with a long tekiah, we're emphasizing the fact that of being whole, emphasize the fact of wholeness and purity. And it ends on a happier note. Remember, a teruah is a sad note. It's a broken-hearted note. The tekiah is the repaired heart. It's the heart that's confident, that's secure. So tekiah gedola is emphasizing those ideas. We want to end on that idea. So we have that custom to do a tekiah gedola at the end. Apparently, the Sephardic communities, I've never been with the Sephardic community on Rosh Hashanah, so I don't know, so maybe some of us have, and you can tell me, but from what I've read, their custom is to actually end with a teruah, which is really the opposite idea. And partly they say it's to confuse the Satan, because remember, teruah is the primary mitzvah of the day. It's a yom teruah. So after you're finished, you do it again. But also their idea is ending with the opposite idea. We want to demonstrate today is a yom teruah. It's a day where we are supposed to be brokenhearted. So by ending with a teruah, we are demonstrating that we are brokenhearted and we feel bad for the mistakes that we've made. And so ending with humility, ending with brokenness. They're both nice ideas. You can take both ideas and bring them, and what speaks to your heart and whatever your community's custom is. But those are, of course, those are customs, not laws. Remember, I said that you can, the general custom is the same person blows the whole time, but obviously if if the person who started gets tired, the second person can join in. If the second person was listening the whole time and is doing the mitzvah, he doesn't have to make another blessing. If you have to go outside and find somebody else who knows how to blow the shofar and who hasn't yet done the mitzvah, he would have to make a new blessing if he came in to join. there is sometimes a shofar, I guess it can get junk inside of it, and the sound might not be good or might be hard to blow, might sound a little rough or whatever. So there's nothing wrong with rinsing it on Yom Tov. Even though you're not allowed to fix a keli, if you have a vessel and it's broken, you're not allowed to fix it on Yom Tov. But rinsing a shofar, you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. Now, if the shofar is actually broken, and I don't think we're going to have time to do this, but I'm going to discuss at the end of the lesson on shofar, the laws of the actual shofar itself. If it's actually broken, then you wouldn't be allowed to fix it on Yom Tov. Now, however, but rinsing it out would be considered okay. It's kind of, I guess I can go on a little farther, but then I guess I'm going to have to finish the laws of shofar next time because there's still a bunch left. I apologize. There's just a lot to do. So the famous debate of eating before shofar, and this is famous because I remember my grandfather comes from a Hasidic background. To him, eating before shofar was like one of the biggest sins a person could possibly do. You couldn't imagine anyone even imagining eating before shofar. And if you did eat before shofar, that's just like terrible avera. And when he heard that that in yeshiva, which I went to a non-Hasidic yeshiva when I was younger, that they let us make kiddush before shofar, he almost had a heart attack. Because like he can't imagine such a thing happening. So where does this debate come from? So it comes from the idea we know that you're not allowed when any mitzvah that's time dependent. So for example, davening or any mitzvah that you have to do at a certain time. Once that time comes, or the most famous is bris milah, right? Once the 8th day arrives, you do the bris as soon as possible. You're not supposed to sit down and eat a meal. The halacha is you're not allowed to eat a meal because the meal could get drawn out, you forget, and the next thing you know, you miss the whole time. So technically, you really shouldn't sit down before eating shofar and eat a meal. However, it's only true when it's a seuda, when it's a meal, right? And if it's not a meal, eating a snack, there is no halacha that says you can't have a snack before doing something that it's a time-bound mitzvah. So technically speaking, halachically, you actually are allowed to eat before shofar. Now, if you recall back, and this is a very good connection to our discussions about mizono, right? When you eat cake, right? Any mizono, we talked about sometimes if you eat a certain amount of cake, then you have to bench, right? That's considered a seuda, right? It's considered a kriya seuda. And we talked basically the size of 5 dates and 5 eggs, right? And unfortunately, many of us, when we go to the break before listening to the shofar, the cake might be really good and we're really hungry and we know it's going to be a couple hours before we get home and have our lunch. So you may eat a little too much cake. And then you just violated the halacha that you're not supposed to have a seuda before hearing the shofar. So this is where the problem comes from. So in many communities, the custom is to have a little kiddush before the shofar because, for obvious reasons, people are hungry. It's a long day, a lot of davening, and so on. It's easier to concentrate if you have a little bit of calories in your system. It's all well and good, but just make sure not to have too much cake. It's probably good for a lot of reasons, but if you do, you'll be stuck that you just started a seuda before shofar, which you're really not supposed to do. So this is really the origin between that debate between my grandfather and my yeshiva as to whether or not we were supposed to eat before shofar. So eat a piece. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to that, usually the Baal Tokeh doesn't eat anything or drink anything before. So we're safe in that way. That
at least he is.
That he makes sure that he's still with the same intention, with the same kavana, and yeah.
Right. Very good. Yeah. So I obviously I have more. I'm up to the discussion of the halachot and the history to some extent of blowing shofar on Shabbos, which has an interesting both ancient and modern history to talk about. But I think it makes sense to leave that for next time. So next time I'm going to talk about the origin of not blowing shofar on Shabbos and whether or not maybe we should. We'll discuss that. I mean, we know our custom is not to, but we'll explain what those debates have been over the years. And we're going to also talk about the actual blowing, like, how many blows and how long it should last and all those things. We're going to do that next time. And then we'll discuss the laws of the shofar itself. And we should probably be able to then discuss the laws of Aseret Yimei Tshuva, which shouldn't take too long, and maybe even bump into a little bit of Yom Kippur the next time around. Any questions or comments on the stuff we covered today? There isn't.
Yeah.
Then go ahead, please.
Just a very quick question, and maybe esoteric, not for tonight. Is the reason not repairing the shofar because it's the final hammer blow?
Yeah. Well, kind of. It's the right track. But whether tikkun mana, it's not clear that it's a keli, that it's a vessel.
Right.
So it may not be the din d'oraisa. It may not be the d'oraisa of, depending on what you're doing exact to fix it. But if it's not kosher and it's and by fixing it you're making it kosher, then almost by definition that's fixing a vessel, and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. But yeah, that's the reason. It could also be bona. It's machlokas whether tikkun mana is bona or makabapatish. That's an argument. Now, you just mentioned it's makabapatish. There are others that say it comes from, but that depends on whether there's binyan by kalim, and that's all the Gemara talks about all this, But you're on the right track.
I have a question.
Sure, please.
Is there any restriction on using different shofarot while you're?
No, not at all. I don't know if I put that in my notes, but if I didn't, I think I put it in my notes later on that you can switch back and forth. In fact, most Balei Tokea have the custom. In fact, it's some places it's a custom to have at least two available just in case one of them, it's one of them can get clogged with spit, with saliva, and then it stops blowing, or one of them, whatever. Just one of them is bigger and easier to blow than the other one. So there's actually a custom to have more than one, and you can definitely, if you have 10, whatever, that's fine too. It doesn't matter.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. Well, then, thank you for participating, and looking forward to finishing Hilchot Shofar next time, and then moving on through the High Holy Days. All right.
Good night, Joe.
All right. You know.
Thank you so much.
See you next week.
Yes.
Stay safe out there.
Yes. Thank you.
Almost.